Hi, everyone. Welcome to ieso Conversations. I'm Kristen Sills, head of marketing at ieso. I am so excited for today's conversation because I'm joined by two guests who bring different but deeply complementary and important perspectives that sit at the intersection of chronic illness, mental health, and lived experience. With me today is Dr. Talia Cohen, or Dr. Talia as she goes by. Talia has a PhD in clinical psychology, and she spent more than 15 years living with and managing multiple chronic conditions herself. Talia works with chronic health tech companies as a lived experience strategist, helping them to better understand the people and patients they serve and make smarter decisions across things like messaging, products, content, and retention strategies. Talia's also built an incredible community of more than 17,000 people who live with chronic conditions through her coaching, course, and newsletter called Thinking Chronically, which is excellent, by the way. She helps people navigating life with chronic illness feel seen, validated, supported, and safe in their bodies, which is so, so important. So Talia, thank you so much for being with us today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for that lovely introduction, and I'm excited to chat.
Also with us is Alyssa Dietz, who's head of clinical strategy here at ieso. Alyssa is herself a licensed clinical psychologist who's worked across the VA, in academic medical centers, in community clinics, and has deep experience in digital mental health. She brings expertise to the emotional and behavioral aspects of health and also has a lot of experience in how technology can be used responsibly to expand access to high quality mental health care. Alyssa, thank you for being here today with us too.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. As I said, I'm really psyched to have you both with us today. And Talia, I want to start with you. As a lived experience strategist, which is such a cool term, you bring like a really unique point of view to this conversation. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about how you came to focus your work at this intersection of chronic illness and mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was first diagnosed with chronic illness when I was a teenager. In that process, there was a lot of shame, a lot of internalized ableism. For a long time, I really never wanted to talk about my illness. I tried to keep it hidden. I just thought it was unprofessional. I didn't want people to know about it. As I got older, my symptoms started to becoming a bigger part of my life. It started becoming harder to hide them, even though my illness was invisible, right? You can't look at me and know what chronic health conditions I'm experiencing. During my psychology PhD, I became really sick. And at that time, I needed more community. I felt really isolated. It wasn't common in a PhD program to see others who were, at the hospital multiple times a week or managing these conditions like I was. So I started posting on Instagram. And in that, it became clear that my combination of psychology, PhD, and also lived experience of illness was a really important combination for people and how they were able to cope with illness. I also just became really passionate about how we need lived experience at the table to build products that people actually use. Because I know what it's like to have a product that, changes your health and makes you feel supported. But if it's not clear that there were the perspectives of those who are actually experiencing it day to day embedded within, it's hard to connect with a service or connect with an individual or a product. So as a lived experience strategist, I'm passionate about helping companies bring in those perspectives in a strategic and operationalized way.
Alyssa, I know you have a lot of experience with working with lived experience partners. Where have you seen some of that value come into play, especially when it comes to those who live with a chronic condition and are maybe struggling with their mental health alongside it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I think that there are a number of places where having lived experience partners is incredibly helpful. The real answer is the whole continuum is the best place to work with lived experience partners. But there are some really key moments where we can test things like the product design. Is it able to be used with the person's conditions and the symptoms they might be experiencing? Are there certain things, certain ways of presenting information that are more resonant? For example, things like using a voice input versus using a text feed, input for people who might have chronic pain. There are things around positioning and explaining the value proposition to the users and making sure it's resonant and consistent with what they're looking for and what their needs are. Things like tracking progress. Are we tracking the right things? Are we asking in a way that is considerate and thoughtful and able to show that we're making an impact on their day-to-day lives? And even when we're doing things like preparing for research studies, making sure again that the recruitment methods, the protocol is thoughtful and inclusive and minimizes harm wherever possible, and also ideally contributes to flourishing and that positive side, not just minimizing harm, but also making it as positive an experience as possible.
Talia, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I love how Alyssa brought up not just minimizing harm, but also, flourishing and joy. I always say that joy is not a reward for healing. It's what facilitates healing. And that's not the message that people with chronic health conditions are getting. The message they're often getting is, like, you need to fix yourself. You need to do this. You need to do that. And not, let's bring in joy and what lights you up and what makes you feel safe in your body as you're also working towards your treatment goals. So that really resonated for me when Alyssa was speaking.
I want to talk about this idea of your condition is all in your head. I'm going to this specialist, this physician. It's tough to get to the bottom of how I'm feeling, but I know that there's something wrong with me. And after a while, you feel maybe like no one's believing you. And so then you start to think, well, is it all in my head? What does that do to someone's mental well-being?
It's absolutely an experience that people have. Almost every single person that I talk to with a chronic health condition has internalized something from the outside, either from a medical professional or a loved one, that has made them consider whether they're making it up or overreacting or being dramatic or too much. This is, it's so much of an issue that I saw that I built my course, Believe Your Body, around this exact idea, because it interrupts your ability to accommodate yourself, which is absolutely important when you have a chronic health condition. It interrupts your ability to advocate for your needs with others. It interrupts your ability to move through the grief cycle of living in a body that feels bad a lot of the time if you're not believing what you're going through, because again, there's a lot of external forces that reinforce that. It's hard to then act from that aligned place to get your needs met.
What about you, Alyssa? Is that something you've seen across maybe your clinical practice or in some of your more professional work with digital mental health?
Yeah, I have seen that. And I think it's something as clinicians, we need to be incredibly thoughtful and mindful of having conversations where your patient or the person that you're working with is the expert in the room. They are the experts on them and their experience, and being open to hearing what that has been like for them and doing so from a non-judgmental approach, and talking about the way that they're experiencing their condition, and using the language that they use, using the terms and the concepts, the way that they talk about it, I think is really important. And that said, something that I have found to be useful is having conversations about how they have observed mental health symptoms impacting their experience. And so I think when we come from a place of impacting or perhaps exacerbating, I tend to believe in, Dr. Talia, please correct me if you feel differently here, but I think that partnership stance is more appreciated, and I would hope feels more considerate and truthful to the person's experience, as opposed to implying that they're just not managing their thoughts or behaviors well enough, but rather it's a big complex relationship between those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you brought in that collaboration word, right? Oftentimes, people with chronic health conditions receive the message that their anxiety or their depression caused their symptoms. Many, many people have anxiety and depression and don't develop chronic health conditions. And having a chronic health condition is a really anxiety provoking and at times sad thing. So we need to really be talking about these, mental health and physical health and how they interact with each other rather than cause each other. And I really liked that you used the term exacerbate as well. I think that that's a really important term because we're not saying because of your stress, you did this. We're saying, how can we work with the stress so that we're not exacerbating symptoms?
One of the things that I think is kind of embedded within what we've been talking about so far is this concept of identity, who you are, whether it's a new diagnosis that's completely rocked your world and shifted everything you feel like you knew about life, and makes you look at life in a different way, and your friends and your relationships and your work and your finances, all of these things kind of come into a sharp relief. Or if you've been living with chronic illness for many, many years, that can obviously impact your identity over time as well. And I know, Alyssa, this is something you've kind of talked about and written about before, but how do you begin to rebuild or continue to build a life that feels meaningful and purposeful to you, even when the condition or conditions you are living with might not ever go away?
So when I'm working with clients, one of the things I like to focus is on values and understanding what makes the person who they are. Like, what do they really care about in life? What's important to them? And that in and of itself can be an illuminating experience. We all kind of know, like, yeah, I want to be a good person, but like, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to have a fulfilling life? Like, what domains do I care about? When it's the end of the day and I'm alone with my thoughts, like, what makes me me? And one of the things I like to do is work through how we can move towards those values, even with what we're experiencing on board. The identity changes, the pain, the exhaustion, the questioning about the experiences, all of that can be true and present and along for the ride as we find ways to move closer towards those values. Now, it might be that things change, right? Like maybe before you used to, I don't know, be a horseback rider and that was something you were super passionate about. And maybe you can't quite do that anymore. But we might find other ways to be around horses or design a course that teaches about the care and keeping of horses or something along those lines, trying to find ways to bring those pieces of you to the forefront. It might look different than it did before, but being able to sort of architect that life that is consistent with your values and constantly moving towards them, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, I love as Alyssa was talking about values, but also really that important piece about adapting. Yeah, maybe before horseback riding was your true love. It brought you so much joy. That's not possible anymore. How do we adapt to what is possible now? And getting from A to B is the work. That's the hard part. And so within that, the two steps, I guess, that are actually a million steps in one, they're not linear, are grieving and acceptance. And so for grief, I talk about grief as grief time travel when you have a chronic health condition. And what I mean by that is you're grieving your past self, right? The one who could horseback ride. You're grieving your current abilities, what you wanted to be able to do now and couldn't. And often we're also grieving a future we thought we could have. And it's all happening at the same time, which is really overwhelming. So learning how to get through that grief allows you to then accept your current reality. And from that space of acceptance, then we can identify those values, adapt those values, move towards the life we want to live with the chronic health condition. But it takes a lot of that messy, emotional, mental health stuff in the middle, right? In order to get to that place. And it's not easy. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and get there.
It's definitely a lifelong practice, like yoga. You're not going to be good at triangle pose immediately, right? But as you practice, you hold the poses, you keep at it, even when it feels hard, even when you're working through the messy middle stuff, there is, it sounds like, some ease that comes after you've worked through and done the work. And you keep doing the work, you keep showing up, and you know that you're going to have bumps in the road and there will be challenges, but moving to that place of acceptance isn't going to happen, like you said, overnight or like a switch. And I love you used horseback riding. My mom was a horseback rider, and because of injury she had, she no longer was able to do it, and it really devastated her. And I saw how that affected her. It was such a part of who she was. It brought her joy. And she kind of went cold turkey, and she just was like, well, I don't want to go to the stables anymore. You know, if I can't do it the way I used to do it, then I'm not interested in doing it at all. And I saw how that really played on her mental well-being and kind of took her to a darker place. And then over time, she kind of learned to accept it. And then she went and kind of visited the farm and found a new way to kind of think about how to be more herself again, but just in a different way. So I love that you brought that example up. It's a bit of a slightly personal one for me. So timely.
Yes, yes, definitely. And something you said, Kristen, that I just wanted to emphasize is that it's never done, right? It's something that we're constantly moving towards. It's sort of an orientation of moving towards that life that is consistent with your values, because as Dr. Talia was saying, like, things are going to change over time. Something that may have been accessible and doable at one point may not be in a few years in the future. So it's a constant process of figuring out, like, who am I, what matters to me, and how can I get closer to that in my day-to-day life. So it's never over. It's a work in progress at all times.
Wouldn't it be nice if it could be over though? Like if we could just do it and then it would be over.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit and focus on getting a little commercial for a minute. When we're thinking about these companies that are helping people with chronic conditions, whether it's gastrointestinal issues or cardiometabolic or chronic pain, do you think that they're doing enough in your experience to address the mental health and identity and trust components of living with a chronic illness? Yes or no, first of all. And then second, part two, if not, or if yes, what are they doing wrong or right?
Well, it depends. Some yes, many no, right?
Yeah.
And it is incredibly important to be thinking about the emotional and mental well-being aspect of living with a chronic health condition, even if your company is focused on treating those physical symptoms, because our mental health impacts our ability to follow through on treatment. And maybe I don't even love that word follow through. I mean, if we're not feeling like we have the internal resources to move forward, it's hard to work on your own physical health. You know, for me personally, at my most sick, what got me through that was the fact that I had this real mindfulness practice that brought me back to myself, that allowed me to have, you know, connection to my emotional health, even when I was experiencing very intense physical symptoms. So it's such a core piece of living with a chronic health condition that I really hope companies will integrate that into their service.
Was that support something that you found on your own, or you knew how to find because of your academic background? Or did someone along the way recommend a certain program to you?
Yeah, my experience, as is the experience of many people with chronic health conditions, is I had to figure out most things on my own, almost everything on my own, and I continued to do that. In addition to that, there are not a lot of resources that are mental health, chronic health specific. Like, the way we treat mental illness is not the same as supporting the mental health of someone with a chronic health condition. Often it requires different ways of speaking, different goals, different, you know, priorities. And that wasn't out there. And that's the gap that I try to fill with a lot of my free resources and my, you know, business. It's not a given that how we treat mental health is the same when you have a physical condition that's impacting your body every day.
Alyssa, do you think that there's a role that technology can play here? Not every therapist is going to be an expert in diabetes care, for example, but maybe with technology, we could get there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's the case. And sometimes when we talk about mental health and the intersection of that with people who are living with chronic conditions, it sometimes gets talked about as if it's this monolith, and it really isn't. And so, you know, it is true that you can have a chronic condition and have depression or anxiety. It's also true that you can have a chronic condition and not have depression or anxiety. But maybe you have some grief that you need to process through, or maybe you want to process your identity shifts and how you see yourself in the world around you in light of this new way of existing and moving through the world. We also can support things like behavior change, right? So if somebody needs to change their behaviors around whether that's, taking a medication or physical things that they need to do around like diet, nutrition, or physical activity needs to change shape. Those are all things that a behavioral health platform can help with. Not all mental health and behavioral health professionals can adeptly do that across a number of different populations. And so I think technology offers a unique ability to have accessible, high quality care that supports multiple aspects of the person and who they are, as opposed to approaching it as this sort of monolith problem that has a one size fits all solution.
Yeah, and if it can be more easily, readily available right away, so you're not doing like what Talia said, which is having to go do the work yourself, find
Yes.
another like app to download, or like go through this list of people to call and maybe half of them don't.
Interviewing therapists, see if they
Yeah.
even know anything about chronic conditions. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think would change if these companies treated mental health as part of the product or platform experience itself?
Any opportunity to validate someone's experience does so much when you're living with a chronic health condition, and often you've been dismissed pretty regularly. And so when there is mental health support immediately available that is chronic condition aware, that can make someone feel like, oh, this is a product that understands me, or the people on this team understand me. It'll allow them to feel comfortable more quickly. There's a lot of, medical trauma, also mental health trauma within this community. And so the more upfront that we can show, like, oh, we've thought about how this impacts your emotional health. We've thought about that, right? If that's there up front, that, might allow someone to feel more comfortable to build that trust up front, which again takes a long time when you're someone who has been in a system that's hard to trust.
So when a digital health company does take all these things into consideration and folds mental health support right into the experience that their patients are having with moving through managing their symptoms and getting the support they need, what are some of the benefits? Like what improves for that company, Alyssa?
Yes. So obviously, the person receiving the care should be at the center of that conversation. And so, if they experience a better quality of life, better outcomes, feel supported, then they're more likely to also be able to persist in using whatever the chronic condition, treatment, or support approach is, which then leads to better outcomes. So if they drive revenue by proving that they're able to, reduce spending on total cost of care or other medical costs, then the likelihood of that happening is much higher when the patients feel fully supported and their needs are being addressed in a comprehensive way.
To build on that, when we integrate lived experience into product development, into content, into messaging, we're really able to not only, again, make the user, the customer, the patient feel seen, but also reduce customer acquisition costs, increase retention for the product, build language that builds trust. Language that builds trust, right? At the end of the day, that's what you need to do when you're working with people with chronic health conditions. So that lived experience aspect really helps business outcomes and customer outcomes. And that's what we want. We want both of those at the same time.
Alyssa, Dr. Talia, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really, really important and illuminating conversation, one that I think many people need to hear and hopefully enjoy hearing. Talia, for people who don't know how to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you and where can they find you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed speaking to both of you. You can learn more about me on my website, drdrtaliaphd.com. I work with startups and companies in the chronic health space. And I also work with individuals with chronic health conditions. You can follow my Instagram, Dr. Talia PhD, or on Substack. My newsletter is called Thinking Chronically, and I speak about the experience of living with chronic health conditions.
Awesome. Everyone go subscribe and follow Talia on Insta.
Thank you.
Alyssa, where can folks find more about you and ieso?
Yeah, sure. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn or you can find me on ieso.ai.
Well, that about does it for today's ieso Conversations. Thank you guys both again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.